There is a moment in every long marriage when the world outside stops mattering and what remains is simply the two people who chose each other. For Pierce Brosnan and Keely Shea Smith, that moment seems to have arrived publicly, loudly, and in a way that nobody in Hollywood quite expected. Keely recently stepped out at several high-profile events looking visibly different, and the reaction from the public was immediate. But what caught people's attention was not just the change in her appearance. It was the way she carried herself, the way Pierce stood beside her, and the quiet story of resilience that had been building for years before anyone started paying attention again. This is not just a story about weight loss. This is a story about what happens when two people refuse to let the world define them. Hollywood has always had a complicated relationship with women who age in public. The spotlight that once celebrated them has a habit of becoming a microscope, picking apart every change, every pound, every line on a face that was once considered flawless by magazine standards. Keely Shea Smith knows that experience better than most. For years, she has been one of the most talked about women in celebrity culture, not because of her own career accomplishments, which are considerable, but because of how she looked standing next to one of cinema's most iconic leading men. Keely's recent appearances at major events in New York sparked a fresh wave of conversation across entertainment media. Photographers and fans immediately noticed that she looked significantly different from how she had appeared in previous public outings. Her presence at events tied to Pierce's professional work drew the kind of attention that her name had not generated in quite some time. But unlike the commentary that surrounded her for much of the past decade, the tone this time had shifted entirely. People were not mocking her. They were admiring her. And a thoughtful segment of the public was asking a harder question underneath all the praise: why does society only celebrate a woman once she fits a narrower image of what beauty is supposed to look like? To understand why this moment carries such weight, it helps to understand who Keely Shea Smith actually is beyond the tabloid framing that has followed her for years. She is not simply a celebrity wife. She built her own identity long before she and Pierce Brosnan became one of Hollywood's most enduring couples. Keely began her professional life in the world of modeling during the late 1980s, a period when the fashion industry's standards were particularly unforgiving. She worked within that world for a time but eventually made the deliberate decision to walk away. In interviews she gave years later, she explained that she reached a point where she felt uncomfortable with what that industry was asking women to represent. She did not want to spend her career reinforcing ideas about beauty that she believed were doing more harm than good. That decision alone says something meaningful about her character. Leaving behind a modeling career requires a level of self-awareness that is rare at any age, and she made that choice at a point in her life when many young women would have simply continued chasing the opportunities in front of them. After stepping away from fashion, Keely moved through several different professional spaces. She had small acting roles and appeared in music video productions before finding her most natural fit in journalism and television hosting. She worked as an environmental correspondent, a role that reflected genuine passion rather than opportunistic career positioning. She contributed to programs connected to major American television networks and developed a reputation as someone who was serious about the subjects she covered. Her work touched on environmental issues at a time when that topic was far less mainstream than it has since become, which suggests she was ahead of certain cultural conversations rather than simply following them. This professional background matters because it explains why Keely has always seemed grounded in a way that pure celebrity culture rarely produces. She had already built something of her own before the full weight of public scrutiny landed on her. She understood what it meant to work, to research, to speak about things that mattered beyond the surface. That foundation gave her something to stand on when the internet began treating her appearance as public property. The cruelty that Keely faced online over the years was not subtle. Social media users made her weight a topic of constant discussion, often in the most reductive and unkind terms imaginable. Side-by-side photo comparisons circulated regularly, placing images of her from the early years of her relationship with Pierce next to more recent photographs, as though a woman's value could be measured by how closely her current appearance matched a version of herself from decades earlier. What made the commentary particularly striking was its contrast with how Pierce himself was treated during the same period. He aged publicly as well, as all people do, and the response to his changing appearance was almost entirely sympathetic or admiring. The double standard was visible and glaring, and many observers pointed it out at the time. But pointing it out did not stop it. The commentary continued, and Keely remained in the middle of it simply by existing as the wife of a famous man. Through all of it, she maintained a composure that many people found remarkable. She did not retreat from public appearances. She did not change her personality to match what critics seemed to want from her. She did not flood interviews with defensive statements or apologies for her own body. She simply continued living her life with the kind of steadiness that takes years to develop. Friends and longtime observers noted that she showed up at events with the same warmth and confidence she had always projected, as though she had made a private decision early on that other people's opinions of her physical appearance were not going to become the organizing principle of her existence. That choice, though quiet, was not passive. It was active and ongoing. Choosing not to collapse under relentless public judgment requires daily effort that the outside world rarely sees or credits. One of the most discussed aspects of this entire story is the way Pierce Brosnan has spoken about his wife throughout the years when public sentiment was at its most unkind. His responses to the criticism directed at Keely did not arrive as carefully prepared statements issued through a publicist. They came across as genuine expressions of a man who found the criticism genuinely baffling. Pierce has spoken publicly about his love for Keely in terms that go far beyond the usual celebrity compliment. He has described her as beautiful with a sincerity that reads as personal rather than performative. He has spoken about aging together as something he finds moving rather than something to manage or minimize. When asked about their relationship in various interviews over the years, he consistently returned to themes of friendship, admiration, and deep familiarity rather than focusing on image or attraction in the shallow sense that Hollywood culture often emphasizes. What made his statements resonate so widely, particularly among fans who had watched the online criticism of Keely intensify, was that he did not begin speaking this way after her appearance changed. He was saying these things during the years when she was being mocked. That timeline matters enormously. It is easy to praise a partner once public opinion turns favorable. It is a different thing entirely to stand publicly beside someone and speak lovingly about them while the internet is doing its worst. Pierce did the latter consistently and without apparent hesitation, and that consistency became one of the most talked about elements of their public story. He also reflected on the passage of time in a way that many people found unexpectedly moving. Speaking about more than 3 decades of marriage, he described their life together as something that had gone by quickly precisely because it had been genuinely good. He spoke about the fact that they still enjoyed each other's company, still made each other laugh, still chose to spend time together in a way that felt natural rather than obligatory. In an industry filled with carefully managed images of perfect relationships that often fall apart the moment cameras are not watching, that kind of ordinary warmth stood out sharply. When Keely appeared at recent public events looking noticeably slimmer, the media response was swift and extensive. Entertainment publications ran photographs and coverage emphasizing how dramatically she appeared to have changed. The attention was significant, and it arrived quickly. But within the broader conversation that followed, something more complicated was happening. Many longtime admirers of the couple found themselves sitting with a feeling of unease alongside the positive coverage. They remembered the years of criticism. They remembered the way the same publications that were now praising Keely's appearance had either participated in or failed to push back against the mockery that had surrounded her before. The sudden enthusiasm felt, to many observers, like confirmation of something troubling about how public opinion toward women operates. Keely herself handled the renewed attention the same way she had handled the criticism before it. She did not perform gratitude for suddenly being celebrated after years of being dismissed. She appeared at events with the same quiet confidence she had always carried, which made the contrast between her attitude and the shifting media narrative even more visible. She was not presenting herself as someone who had finally earned approval. She was simply being herself, as she apparently had been all along. That continuity of character became one of the most discussed aspects of the whole story. A number of commentators and fans pointed out that Keely had been speaking publicly about body acceptance and gratitude for years before the weight loss became headline news. She had shared messages about appreciating what the human body is capable of enduring rather than judging it purely by appearance. Those messages had not generated nearly as much coverage when she shared them as they might have if a slimmer woman had said the same things. The timing of public attention, in other words, told its own story. The conversation surrounding Keely Shea Smith's transformation has grown into something much larger than celebrity news because it touched several sensitive and ongoing cultural discussions simultaneously. Questions about how aging women are treated in public life, about the way physical appearance determines how seriously a person is taken, and about what genuine partnership looks like in the middle of intense external pressure all became part of what people were actually discussing when they talked about Keely and Pierce. For many women watching this story unfold, there was a recognition that went beyond celebrity interest. The experience of being judged harshly for one's appearance and then suddenly treated warmly after fitting more closely into a socially approved image is not unique to Hollywood. It is an experience that plays out in workplaces, in social environments, and in countless everyday interactions. Keely's public version of that experience simply made it visible on a large screen and gave people a specific story to point to when discussing dynamics that are often difficult to articulate. Pierce's role in all of it continued to draw admiration precisely because it offered a counterexample to a pattern many people have come to expect. The husband who distances himself from a partner facing public criticism, or who gradually allows that distance to grow until it becomes permanent, is a familiar figure in celebrity culture. Pierce represented something different. He remained present, vocal, and specific in his affection during the years when it was least convenient to be so. That is a harder thing to do than it might appear, and people recognized it. What ultimately separates the story of Pierce Brosnan and Keely Shea Smith from the standard Hollywood narrative is that their partnership appears to have been built on something that physical appearance cannot fully account for. They share more than 3 decades of history together. They have raised children together. They have navigated personal losses and professional changes and the relentless churn of public life together. Pierce has spoken about all of these dimensions of their relationship in interviews, always returning to the idea that what matters most is the life they have actually built rather than how it appears from the outside. That perspective is not complicated, but it is rare in an environment that constantly rewards image over substance. And it may be the most important part of the story that gets lost in all the coverage of transformation and red carpet appearances. The reason people are still talking about Keely and Pierce is not simply because she looks different now than she did a few years ago. It is because watching them together, over time and through difficulty, offered people a glimpse of something that feels increasingly scarce in public life, a relationship that appears to have remained fundamentally honest with itself. Keely Shea Smith's story is still being written, and the current chapter is one of public admiration after years of undeserved criticism. But the most meaningful part of her story is not the transformation itself. It is the way she carried herself through everything that came before it, with dignity, consistency, and a refusal to define her worth by the ever-shifting opinion of an audience she never asked to have. Pierce stood beside her through all of it and continues to do so now. In a world that treats long-term love as something to be suspicious of rather than celebrated, their story offers something quietly powerful. It suggests that the most enduring thing two people can offer each other is not perfection or unchanging youth or a carefully maintained image. It is the willingness to stay present, speak honestly, and choose each other again and again across the years, regardless of what anyone outside that relationship has to say about it. And perhaps that is why people cannot stop talking about them. Not because of the weight loss or the red carpet moments or the headlines. But because somewhere underneath all of it, people recognize something true.